Yo, what is up guys, Grim here. Xuan is currently dominating Endgame, finding her way onto the main roster of almost every player who has pulled her, with many stating her as the reason they're finally able to clear the hardest content in the game, or further optimizing their teams for even crazier performance. In this video, we're going to be going over the major discoveries the community has made since Xuan's release, and going into specific detail on her personal survival, her ability to keep the team alive and protect them, why her crit rate buff is completely absurd, how her CC protection is a game changer, and finally her overall impact on the meta. Before Xuan's release, the biggest concern people had about her was whether or not she'd be able to keep herself and her team alive alone as a solo sustaining character. Let's tackle that first part first and dive into her ability to keep herself alive. The community has done extensive testing, both inside and outside the game, and come to the conclusion that the key to Xuan's personal survival is a solid set of relics. The general consensus is that as long as your Xuan has around 6500 to 8000 HP and 1400 to 1600 defense or more, on top of a reasonable amount of speed, an energy recharge rope, and one of her 5 best light cones, she'll effectively be immortal in battle to all but the biggest hits. So with Xuan herself being unkillable for the most part with gear, we can move on to the second part of our question, which is how would she fare keeping her team alive, and how would it feel to play without any healer or shields? Well, pretty much everyone I've spoken to with a reasonably geared Xuan agrees it feels incredible, mainly thanks to her unique damage mitigation abilities, which are far more powerful than meets the eye. In order to understand that power, let's take a closer look. Let's assume you have a maxed out Xuan with 8000 life, accompanied by 3 party members with 3000 life each, which is a pretty standard scenario. The first thing Xuan will do for them is grant them a percentage of her own life with her matrix, which at max trace level is 6%, or 480 extra life in this example, bringing them up to 3480 life instead of 3000. That's already a 16% increased tankiness boost just from her first ability. Xuan's talent that redirects damage is next, and is the single strongest damage mitigation ability in the game, without a doubt. Assuming Xuan has no survival issues, this talent straight up mitigates 65% of all damage your other party members would take, passing it on to Xuan instead, which she can easily deal with herself. This means your team is only taking 35% of the damage they originally would, which is equivalent to being almost 3 times as tanky as without Xuan in the party. Finally, Xuan has her team-wide damage mitigation, which she applies again thanks to her talent, which is another 18% damage reduction. When you add the bonus HP, damage redirection, and this damage reduction together, your teammates that had 3000 HP originally now have the equivalent of 11,731 HP, without even counting their defense, which is almost 4 times as tanky. I think we can all agree that making most of your team almost 4 times as tanky is completely insane, and all of this on top of her being borderline unkillable herself. The icing on the cake is that Preservation has access to some insane light cones that push Xuan's utility and team tankiness even further. Her signature provides team-wide full heals every wave reset. Day 1 of My New Life provides even more team-wide damage mitigation, and Landau's Choice or Moment of Victory provide taunting capabilities. Any of these options are just going to make your team even more durable. This level of tankiness, combined with her self-heal and spot healing abilities, cements her as the strongest sustaining character from protecting from one-shots, and a great choice for Memory of Chaos in Endgame. So as a solo sustaining character, Xuan is crazy. But perhaps what makes her most enticing isn't that at all. It's that her damage mitigation is even more powerful when paired with another sustaining character like Luocha. Mixing Xuan's ridiculous team tankiness with near unlimited heals makes game modes where damage is a major issue like Swarm Disaster Difficulty 5 substantially easier. And if we ever see harder content in the future, I am certainly going to be glad she's on my account. Now, if it was just her tankiness and ability to solo sustain, she would already be a pretty busted unit. But of course, we have more to talk about, namely her crit rate buff, which she grants the entire party from her skill. The crit rate buff in question is actually only 12% crit rate, which on the surface doesn't sound too impressive, and in fact is only around 4 crit rate % substats, which certainly isn't anything to write home about. So why is this so good? Well, the first reason is that crit rate, despite being available on gear, is actually quite a challenging stat to get a good amount of, unless you're blessed by the luck gods and delivered incredible relic substat rolls. 4 crit substats can sometimes be 2 to 3 whole pieces of gear's crit subs, meaning getting it for free can ease some of the pressure on your gear or simply allow you to get far higher crit rate than you're used to. The second reason is that crit rate is a stat you want a specific amount of, and in many cases it feels like you just can't get enough. This is especially true on destruction and erudition characters who have very limited access to crit rate on their light cones and need to pick it up on their gear instead, which, as mentioned earlier, is completely up to chance. The specific amount many characters are looking for to chase is usually the required amount to activate their planar set, which is 50% for Inulsal Soto and a whopping 70% for Rudolent Arena. That Rudolent Arena requirement is generally a very hard bar to hit for destruction characters that aren't either Invincible Lune or Blade, so it's definitely a huge help there. Xuan's crit rate makes hitting both of these substantially easier, making characters a lot easier to build. The third and final reason is massive endgame scaling. At a certain point of gear progression, every crit rate based character eventually wants to move away from using a crit rate cloak and instead use a crit damage cloak. That is almost always a massive damage upgrade as long as you can maintain a high crit rate. Xuan lets you make this massive damage gain swap far earlier in your account's progression, meaning you can get those gigantic crits quicker than ever. To give you guys a little bit more context about how busted this crit rate buff actually is, and how far it can push some of your characters, I want to give you guys a few examples on my account. So this is my Sele. She currently has 86% crit rate and 173% crit damage, which is already some pretty good stats. I'm almost guaranteed to get a crit, but not every single time. Sele relies on understanding which enemies you can kill and which enemies you can't, because if you kill an enemy, you get to move an extra time. If you don't, your turn ends. So guaranteeing a crit is a huge deal for planning out Sele's combos, and Xuan essentially gives me my 100% crit, making my Sele way more consistent and way more fun to play. Without Xuan, I'm going to miss a few crits here and there, and I'm going to be pretty damn sad. It's also going to give her a ton more damage overall, thanks to taking full advantage now of the crit damage I already have. So I'm sure some of you guys are thinking, well, he said earlier that you can just get that crit rate from gear, and it's only 4 substats worth, so why not just get it from gear and get the same effect? Well, the reason for that is that getting perfect gear in order to get something like 100% crit rate is incredibly hard. It's not too bad to get 50, 60, maybe even 70% of all of your gear with good substats, but getting the remaining 30%, which is generally what you're gonna need to get that 100% crit rate with crazy crit damage, is actually really hard. And Xuan pushes you over there and bridges the gap between good gear and perfect gear and allows you to make some of the similar builds and plays that you'd be able to do with that. And as mentioned earlier, destruction characters seriously struggle with their crit rate. You can see here my Clara only has 62% crit rate despite having full investment in crit on her relics here. I'm even using a crit rate cloak, but that's still not enough to get a good crit value here. But with Xuan in the mix, she goes from 62 all the way up to 74% crit, making her a lot more consistent and allowing her to dish out a lot more damage. And what's so crazy is that neither of these characters have made the transition from the crit rate cloak to the crit damage cloak right now. And honestly, without Xuan on my account, that would be so far away from me I wouldn't be able to even consider it. But I'm now currently gearing up my characters to get just a bit more crit so I can make the swap to crit damage and really take all my characters to the next level. Xuan has one more trick up her sleeve though, which really pushes her over the edge, and that's her crowd control protection effect on her skill. Big crowd controls like imprisons, entangles, and freezes have been getting more and more common in Endgame. Crowd controls are some of the most lethal effects in the game, locking you out from using ultimates, delaying your turn, and doing big damage. Xuan can block all these nasty effects not just once, but multiple times per fight. With Xuan on the team, things get a whole lot safer and more manageable. And if you're someone who fine-tunes the exact turn order of your team with speed, this is going to protect you from being messed up the second one of those crowd controls is used. It also helps out characters that have their kits substantially hindered by crowd controlling effects such as Blade, Clara, and Xuan. So with all this power, Xuan has to come with some downsides, right? Well, outside of her gear requirements, she has two major drawbacks. The first is she struggles to solo sustain characters like Blade, Arlen, or any HP sacrificing character that lowers their life incredibly often and quickly, as the majority of her survival tools are not based around raw HP recovery. Fortunately, this can be easily fixed by pairing her with a healing character in order to keep these units healthy. Normally, this would lower your overall team's damage as you can't bring two damage-focused supports, but thanks to Xuan also bringing her crit rate buff, it's not a complete loss, meaning double sustain compositions with Xuan are much more competitive in terms of damage. The second drawback is a pretty big one, and it's that she isn't fully skill point positive due to her having to use her skill every third action in order to keep her matrix and buffs active. As a comparison, Xuan will generate only 1/3 of the skill points compared to a fully skill point positive sustain like Luocha. This drawback is certainly very noticeable, but can be played around by bringing other fully SP positive supports like Pella, or by playing a damage dealer that isn't too fast or reliant on skill points. So, ultimate defense, powerful offensive buffs, absurd utility and quality of life, all with downsides that can easily be mitigated. These are the reasons Xuan is currently dominating Endgame, and based on our current understanding of Star Rail, this looks unlikely to change anytime soon. Thanks to the diversity of her kit, ability to synergize and stack so incredibly well with other sustaining units, Xuan is likely to hold on to her spot at the top of many tier lists for many patches to come. So what do you guys think about Xuan? Is she as strong as you were expecting? Comment down below how you're finding the pink general, or if there's anything I missed. Hopefully you guys are enjoying the video, and good luck with your pulls and relic farming, and until next time, cheers.